So before we wrap up our 2008 series, we wanted to take a step back and reflect on everything that we learned and try to process it in a larger context. The more that Hannah and I and all of our guests talked about 2008, the more it just occurred to us how deeply odd of a moment in history that it was. And we started this mini season with the question, what was going on in 2008? What was happening that suddenly studios were like, let's put marketing budgets behind these movies geared toward women, and women showed up? Why did this anomalous year happen? And so we decided to talk to one of my all-time favorite cultural critics, Stephen Metcalf, to ask what he thinks about this. Stephen is the co-host of two of my all-time favorite podcasts, two of the podcasts that I listen to no matter what every week. One is newer. It's called What Rough Beast, and it is with him and Virginia Heffernan. And the other is the Slate Culture Gabfest with Dana Stevens and Julia Turner. And Stephen is just someone who I've been listening to over the last 10 years and has repeatedly changed the way that I think about culture, has just opened up the paradigm for me a little bit to the point where I feel like I really do see the world slightly differently because of him. And since his commentary has been in my head as we have been thinking about 2008, we thought, why not just go to the man himself and see what he has to say? So, with all of that in mind, we are going to get Stephen Metcalf on the phone. I'm Vanessa Zoltan, and this is Hot and Bothered. Hi, Stephen. Thank you so much for getting on.
Hey, thank you so much for having me, Vanessa. I'm delighted to be here.
So you are absolutely one of my favorite culture critics, bar none, but specifically the way that you think about how the economy or economics in general interplays with culture. You are one of the brains who I respect the most on that, which is why we invited you, because we are looking at movies of 2008. And a lot was happening culturally in 2008, obviously. We have the recession, we have Obama, and then we also have this very strange moment where movies geared toward women dominated the box office for 1 year. Mamma Mia beat James Bond was one of the cultural headlines. And so I know I just threw a lot at you, but I'm wondering, when you look back on 2008, how you think about what was going on culturally at the time.
Oh, that's so interesting. I mean, I see it as one of those classic, if you're like me and you traffic in cheap zeitgeist hustling,
that is my career.
Yeah, exactly. So what do you love? You love these super obvious turning point, or in retrospect, super obvious turning point years. And everyone has their own pet one, 1973 or 1982, 1983. I think 1983 is my big pet one. Mm-hmm. And '08 is just so glaringly obvious because, my life parses out so patly that it just seems made up, right? Which is, I go to high school in 1979 at the absolute nadir, literally 2 months after the Melez speech. Mm-hmm. And I graduate 1 or 2 months before the Dow Jones finally takes off and spikes. Mm-hmm. And for good, right? It's never stopped doing that with '08. We'll get to '08, but basically to '08 it didn't. And finance becomes the primary profit driver of American capitalism for a full-on half to 2/3 of a generation. And that just reshapes absolutely everything. So the movies that you're looking at in '08 almost have to be reflecting that, right? Because they're not forward-looking. They all got made probably in '06, '07. They certainly got green-lighted in '06, '07.
Right.
And so there's just been a bubble economy, a super high, quote-unquote, value-add economy based in tech and finance in terms of just making money.
Right.
So it's at the very tail end of Bubble Land. And then what one would have thought was a huge reckoning and reversal that turned out in the end to be anything but, which is fascinating.
Right.
So, the election of Obama is attended by the expectation of in addition to the obvious symbolic victory, which is hard to minimize, like an expectation of a combination of Obama as the first Black president and the global financial crisis exposing everything that we'd lived for close to 40 years as a complete and utter ideological lie. You thought that a big, introspective, moral reckoning would happen, then followed by a gigantic structural change. And then those things didn't happen. So '08 ends up being a turning point in which the biggest things that should have turned don't turn. And so we live in the shadow of just a mixed metaphors. Like we live in you can't live in the shadow of a dog. Yeah, you can live in the shadow of a dog that didn't bark. We're in the shadow of a dog that never barked, right? In some weird way. So the question I'd throw back at you, which I'm really fascinated to hear the answer, is do you think that that's some aspect of that is reflected in culture that was being produced according to the presumption of the previous era without any full sense of what was coming next? I mean, specifically those movies geared toward and starring women.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely think that there are parts of them that are the apotheosis of the post-feminist, just like commodity-driven culture, right? Specifically with the Sex and the City movie. But the thing that I remember thinking, there were all these think pieces when Chicago came out that kept reverberating in my head when Mamma Mia came out, which is, right, like musicals do better and skirts get shorter during wartime and recessions.
Oh, interesting.
And sort of sitting there being like, what shoe is going to drop? Like, what does musical theater know that we don't know?
Oh, interesting.
But also totally, I mean, like just falling head over heels for the hope of it all. Like truly being like, it has to mean something that more people want to see Mamma Mia than want to see somebody shoot other people up.
Oh, I love it. So what were the movies again? Mamma Mia.
We have Mamma Mia. We have the Sex and the City movie. We have Forgetting Sarah Marshall, which Forgetting Sarah Marshall and Judd Apatow in general. I can't even tell you how much I believed that feminism had become so part of the mainstream that like the sign of nerdy men who I guess I just equated with respecting women, like was a good sign for womankind. And then you go back and you watch Knocked Up and Forgetting Sarah Marshall and you just want to take a shower after it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But like, I can't believe how profoundly I believed in it at the time. And then 27 Dresses, the question that came up again and again while watching these movies was, do these movies hate women? And we did 5 movies. So we did Forgetting Sarah Marshall, 27 Dresses, the Sex and the City movie, and then we did Twilight and Mamma Mia. And the conclusions we came to are that Twilight and Mamma Mia like women. And the other 3, I think, just like hold their audiences in complete contempt.
Oh, that's not a good ratio. And it's why I can't believe Twilight was '08.
Yeah.
It was that long ago.
Yeah. It holds up, Stephen.
I've never experienced Twilight, the book, or any Twilight-related media.
Watch
None.
the 2008 movie. It is worth bursting the bubble of being able to say that. It is like pure camp.
Pattinson.
Yes, Pattinson.
Is that his name?
Mm-hmm.
Pattinson, close.
Mm-hmm.
And then who's the...
Kristen Stewart.
Yeah, no, I'm in. That's really good. That's really good. Okay, I'll watch that.
And interestingly, Mamma Mia and Twilight are the 2 of those 5 films, and I did not do that on purpose, that were directed by women. So.
And where are we in the history of streaming then? Like, Golden Era TV is still in the premium cable space, right?
Yeah, Mad Men ends in 2015.
Got it. And Breaking Bad is probably up and running by '08,
yeah.
Maybe? That's interesting. So it's funny. So you have, all right, I'm just going to like riff on this for a second, but you have, like, if I try to think of an iconic male pop cultural hero, on video of one form or another from around that era, they're all progeny of Tony Soprano, right? They're all the like, okay, now we're going to have like deeply, darkly ambivalent looks into male masculinity as it involves selfishness, greed, misogyny, arguably sociopathy, right? So like Walter White, Don Draper, Tony Soprano, on and on and on. And I cannot think of a quote unquote, like more traditionally white-hatted male hero from that era at all. So it's interesting that that is the closest thing to a gender counterbalance to the trend that you're picking up on in 08.
Yeah.
One uses the phrase crisis of masculinity so advisedly.
Yeah.
It's sides of a coin with all kinds of gender prerogative to think that men are sort of uniquely endangered or somehow not self-victimizing and haven't placed themselves, thanks to whopping amounts of entitlement, into the position of feeling finally vulnerable. But it's just interesting to think that masculine heroism of a traditionally like Hollywood kind maybe had played itself out that long before the advent of obviously like Trump and a million think pieces about the crisis of boys, the crisis of men. So something was going on already, it seems like. But what?
Right. I mean, I think that this is where we have to come around to race, because it's the end of like a certain kind of white man, right? With Obama coming into the picture. And it was the first time that white men were going to have to see themselves potentially as not entitled to running the world all of the time forever. And yeah, it's almost like you can't separate Hillary Clinton from this either. There's the vitriol for Hillary Clinton at this time.
Yeah. The visceral hatred and castration fear around that particular politician.
Yeah.
So intense.
Yeah.
I love what you say about Obama too, because when you think about highly aspirational male qualities that if you had asked someone in like 1950 or 1960, I mean, sort of pre-boomer, or whatever, I mean, sort of before the countercultural revolution or the anti-establishmentarianism of the boomers, like if you had said, what constitutes a virtuous, fully realized American male? What are Obama's strongest qualities, right? Like deeply thoughtful, committedly monogamous, good father, socially minded.
Athletic.
Right. Well, handsome and athletic, right? I mean, just like incredibly charismatic in a low-key, non-self-congratulatory way, like physically capable.
Yeah.
And handsome, right? He was kind of all the things.
Yeah.
And he was Black. And there was something about, like, somehow those qualities describe a man when he's white who's kind of obsolete and maybe not an object of trust anymore. But they can be revived in a Black male president, right? In a way that it would be hokey, like we had become too ironic for it, or too suspicious of, or maybe we just internalized and accepted that the capitalist heroes of American culture for 40 years have been basically the financiers and the tech lords, and that they're sociopaths. And there's a kind of salutary, like doing them the biggest favor you could. Like there's a salutary immoralism to them in their sociopathy, like the kind of the disruptor ethic or the hacker ethic. And therefore we no longer believe, like it's just like, it's like a Phil Hartman parody to have someone who's got a kind of solid, stalwart, self-possessed, beautifully turned out quality to them if they're a white guy, right?
Yeah.
Like they're fucking lying to you. And somehow it was trustworthy when it came to Obama, and heroic, right? It just had an element of heroism to it.
I couldn't help but think of the 1970s. I kept thinking about Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid as you were talking, that like in the 70s, we were killing the idea of the virtuous cowboy, right? That it's like cowboys were actually thugs who went to Bolivia and just robbed poor people. And even if they're beautiful like Robert Redford and Paul Newman, and you kind of want to root for them because they're so charming, they're just petty thieves. And the stories that Hollywood has been telling for the last 50 years about cowboys is killed with Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. And I feel like Tony Soprano kills the modern equivalent of that, of like The Godfather, and just like 2008 is when we're killing that in the same way. And we're in this, I don't know, that maybe gives me a little bit of hope, because then in the 80s you have like Gordon Gekko. So I'm like, maybe we're now in the Gekko post-Butch Cassidy moment, but there's another good moment coming where we're gonna eviscerate the Don Drapers and Tony Sopranos again. But yeah, it's just like 2008 really is mostly reminding me, of like 70s cinema while you're talking.
I love it. Yeah, the revisionist Western, and all of those totally non-traditional male movie stars, right?
Right.
The Dustin Hoffman,
right.
Donald Sutherland, famously, like Gene Hackman. Male heroic virtue has been complicated for a really long time when you look at it, right? It got so complicated by the 70s and the rise of the counterculture and kind of, what was it called? I guess New Hollywood, basically.
Yeah.
Right? Completely deconstructed that ideal. Yeah. And then when you kind of had a version of it, it was terrifying, right? Like the Dirty Harry movies, the Clint Eastwood of the Dirty Harry movies, like kind of openly fascistic and sadistic almost. And it kind of never, I guess it never really reconstituted. I guess maybe that's the innocence of Star Wars, that it has some of that, but it's because it's so like a Buck Rogers serial from the 40s or 50s.
Yeah.
It takes place out of time in some sense.
Mm-hmm.
But
totally.
That is fascinating. All right, so all of this washes up on the shoals of 2008.
Yes. So you said that you think that 2008 is like this watershed moment, one of these transitional moments. I will say, I just have to tell you, because it's hilarious, you'll never guess where I was in 2008 and 2009. I was at the University of Pennsylvania getting my master's in nonprofit management at Wharton.
Oh, yeah. You were a Wharton kid.
I mean, kind of. It was half at Wharton and half at the social work school. But
nonprofit and Wharton are two things, matter and antimatter.
It was wild, because the pedagogy at Wharton when I arrived in the fall of 2008 was to watch the WIN stock. Like every week we checked in on how the WIN stock was going, because there was just this belief that it was just always going up. And this had been the pedagogy for 10 years, where you just watched the stock go up all year, weekly. And it was the first time since they had been doing this that stock went down, and they didn't change the pedagogy.
Oh, that's amazing.
It was just keep going the way we've been going, even though we were watching the world fall apart. It was wild.
That is really wild. I mean, casting one's mind back to like 2005, 6, 7, right? The absolute height of like neoliberal fatuousness about markets and the panacea that markets marketize everything, and everything else is like an abomination against nature, practically, to interfere with markets or the profit motive, or on and on. And I would say also, as an American white male, I will say, as a piece of personal testimony, there was this odd effect where there was something about men in finance socially, when they entered a room with a variety of people in different fields, there was a kind of fearful deference, like kind of tacit, fearful deference to the guy in finance. Because there's one thing is you just can't avoid, no matter how your own value system might reject it, it's very hard to avoid just the material fact of someone making not twice as much as a lawyer. Forget schlubs like me, right? It's not just that they make twice as much as a lawyer or twice as much as a school teacher or whatever. It's that they're now making 500 times a lawyer making $1 million. Like there are just people who walk in the room and you're suddenly conscious of the fact that this person who's making 50, 100, 200 million dollars a year. It's just like gravity kind of bends a little bit when someone like that walks in. And then the pretense to being an omni-intellectual. It's like, well, if all things are essentially motivated by self-interest in the universe, right? And there were theories that connected it to like the molecular facts of the universe, right? Like forget that it's culturally contingent to the United States of America in the latter part of and early part of the 21st century. It wasn't even that. It was like tied to nature itself, right? There were reputable philosophers who would talk about like how the Darwinian principle is tied to individual human self-interest, but on the other direction, it literally is the organizing principle by which we go from chaos to solar systems, And that kind of lunacy, that sheer level of lunacy is what it was like pre-08. And once '08 hit, suddenly it was totally clear it had been all based on bullshit, right? The idea that Wall Street was pricing risk and pricing risk with total sophistication and therefore deserved these huge paydays. I mean, the entire ideological apparatus was just dead going forward. And we now, to this day, we live in the aftermath of that death. And that, I think, is what defines '08 going forward, at the same time that '08's I believe it's the introduction of the iPhone. And so if you want to talk about fragmentation, step one is the collapsing, defining ideology of markets. And in its place, you suddenly have a device that's connected to the internet in your pocket. That's all the things it is, including a camera. And then, I can't remember now, but Facebook really only begins to take off right around '08, '09, I believe. Twitter's maybe 2011. Essentially you get the introduction of social media, and then compared to what came before, a radically fragmented world is now in the works. And of course, we can't forget when we're talking about 2008, I believe, isn't that a watershed year for Taylor Swift?
Yes. Fearless.
There you go.
Yeah.
So you get the iPhone, Obama, Taylor Swift, and then very soon after that, social media and streaming TV. And we kind of live like that laid the groundwork for what we're in now, for better and for worse.
America died in 2007.
America's so good at dying now. And then in the horror movie, it pops back up.
I know. I have a visual that haunts me, and it's from The Little Mermaid. It is Ursula, after she was stabbed, one of her tentacles splashes the water one more time, and it causes this tidal wave of destruction. And I like to think that that is where white supremacy and patriarchy is going, that it's been stabbed and it's dying. And I'm but the tidal wave that it is creating on the way down could destroy everything. And that is just an image from the late 80s that haunts me. So
all too apt.
I mean, this is making me think that it isn't that we abandoned women directors and movies geared toward women with big marketing budgets, right? These movies have always been made. What's special about 2008 is that they were successful, which to me just means that they were finally given marketing budgets, right? It's not like women didn't want to go and see themselves represented on film before, but it means that for a minute, studios believed that it was worth the investment of plastering posters everywhere. But actually, it's just, it's everything ended. Everything ended with the iPhone and streaming. I mean, we just all became, not everything ended, everything became more bifurcated.
Yeah. I'll give you another '08 turning point.
Yeah.
It's the first Marvel movie. It's Iron Man.
Oh my God.
And when you think about it, that is a turning point in the history of movie stardom.
For sure.
Where the IP is really the character and the world. The star can be very important, and has been very important. But in some sense, the movie star is being carried by the intellectual property of the old Marvel character treasury rather than vice versa.
And Iron Man is fascinating because it's about a tech billionaire.
Yeah, exactly. Who's amoral in the extreme and charismatic and funny.
It actually leads beautifully to something I would love your thoughts on. I know you haven't seen Twilight, and well, I grieve that for you. We had an academic on who's talking to us about Twilight. And obviously the books are at the height of their success in 2005, 2006. But that, vampires are becoming super popular in 2008. And the fantasy of women falling in love with billionaires.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
And his theory was basically that women were we're never going to get equal pay. We're never going to get treated well. Let's go back to the fantasy a little bit of being rescued.
Yeah, sure.
And that it's these women who take away power from the most powerful men, right? It's Bella in Twilight is the only mind who Edward can't read. She is the super special one and he is the monster. And yet he gives her access to all of these things that basically, that is so much of the fantasy of the vampire and of these billionaire lovers.
That is a great theory. When did the Thomas Piketty book about Capital come out?
Oh, yeah.
2013, so a little bit later, but definitely in response to '08. And it's like a doorstop, so he did not write it overnight, so it probably was directly in response. But in it,
quick. No. Can you do that? Can you give us a summary of the Piketty argument?
Yeah, the argument is that it's basically a formula, which is that rates of return on capital have so exceeded growth rates, economic growth rates, that a financialized economy, especially, a quote unquote first world or developed world financialized economy, it basically becomes a giant machine for funneling wealth upward. And it's an inexorable process, formulaic. It's like truly an algorithm, right? And even though we may lionize stupidly, in I think Piketty's opinion and mine, right? And I'm sure yours deludedly, we might individually lionize people for their ability to win income, which is itself a lie. But the bigger lie is that the much larger phenomenon is this kind of mindless process whereby the rich will just get richer inexorably. I can't remember whether Piketty gets into this, but so many people have, is that if you just do a graph of wages mapped onto a graph of productivity growth, and there's just this mammoth gap in between how much worker productivity has risen relative to their wages. Yeah. And you do not have to be a dyed-in-the-wool Marxist to look at the space between those two lines as theft, as wage theft. Yeah. And where did it go? It went to quote-unquote shareholders because of the shareholder value revolution. So what made me think of Piketty vis-a-vis the situation of women and maybe the temptation on the part of some women to sort of throw in the towel and basically say capitalism will never put me on an equal footing.
Right.
Even if we thought that was a solution to anything, right? The equal opportunity myth. Even if we buy into the idea that equality of opportunity forgives, in some sense, inequality of outcome, it's never going to happen. It'll never happen that going into the marketplace for high-end white-collar talent, I, as a woman with a Yale law degree or a degree from Wharton, I'm never going to be, even then, on an equal footing with men. Why wouldn't I develop a compensatory fantasy about being rescued by a rich guy? Well, Piketty has a wonderful riff incredibly dismaying riff about that, where he basically says, we are going back to Jane Austen. He uses Jane Austen as the example. We are going to go back to a marriage market that is going to obliterate the presumptions of the companionate marriage of the 20th century. And instead, it is going to be women essentially turning themselves into, commodities effectively or whatever, sort of self-commodifying in order to attract the rich husband. And we're going back to Mansfield Park and Pride and Prejudice. And that just really stuck with me as the father of two incredibly smart, ambitious daughters. What a horrifying fucking thought. What a horrifying thought.
And forget second shift, right? Part of the thing about Edward as a vampire is he can drive you everywhere because he moves at the speed of light. You literally don't have to carry yourself. Forget working all day, coming home, doing the dishes, doing the laundry. You literally don't even have to walk. And so what better fantasy?
None.
Yeah.
It's the vice is so merciless too, because it's not just that any highly credentialed woman in the high-end, white-collar economy is never going to be able to quote-unquote compete fairly, but it's also as you move down the income scale, right? And the social safety net in America is so incredibly tattered. Yeah. Who's expected to pick up the slack? One understands why there would be a mass desire for pop culture about rescuing men, right? With money, with means. Yeah. Oh my God.
Wow, I shouldn't be surprised, but this has really depressed me in a really exciting way. I'm thinking about a lot of connections. What I'm thinking about these 5 movies is that they are 5 different attempts at fantasy and, living on a Greek island and having all of your friends come in, that makes total sense to me. And that, I think, was always obvious. But what Sex and the City and Twilight and Forgetting Sarah Marshall and 27 Dresses are peddling in is just like deep ambivalence. And I think that that's why the movies are hard to watch to some extent. It's women want to fantasize about having a good career and great friendships and to some extent not needing a man, while also potentially coming to terms with the fact that we still live in Georgian England. And so if we're going to get a man, it should be a billionaire.
I'd love to hear your take on Sex and the City and like the legacy of it, and whether the presumption of behind all four of those women was sort of the single presumption of landing a man and landing the right man, or whether it was. I mean, I kind of recall that, for example, like Emily Nussbaum maybe argued that it was way more complex than that, but I don't remember the specifics of that argument. And I quite like the TV show. I didn't follow through with any of the movies, but I was also like, I could never decide whether it was like a guilty pleasure to like the show, whether it was a kind of deep, interesting take on female friendship and ambition, or something else. Anyway, I'm dying to hear where you land on all that.
So I think it is all of those things. I loved watching it as a young person. It started when I was a sophomore in high school and continued through when I graduated from college. And so like really developed a lot of my sense of the dating world. Looking back, I like kind of want it to pay for a lot of my therapy. I think that it was hugely detrimental to the idea of making myself a commodity, really in almost entirely in market terms, that there is a shortage of good men and that dating is a zero-sum game, and that if someone else gets a man, you don't, and hurry, honey, because the clock is ticking. And, you know, I don't blame Sex and the City insofar as like I think the art was imitating life. I just don't think that those were messages that I needed to hear more of and see projected onto like such gorgeous, thin, wealthy bodies, and be like, well, if Sarah Jessica Parker is having that problem, like what hope do I have? One of the things that I love and appreciate about Sex and the City is how material it makes itself, that Carrie is 38 years old and is like, now is the time I have to decide whether or not to have a kid. It has to be by 38, which is real. But then I was 33 and I was like, oh my God, I only have 5 years, right? Like, so the representation of something true, I think it was almost like its popularity and ubiquity was just really fighting against it. So maybe that's a representation problem. It like was supposed to represent too many things. And if there were more stories like that, it could have had a smaller voice in my head. But instead, it just loomed so large that I let it teach me what being a heterosexual woman was gonna look like.
I mean, those images are incredibly powerful, right? I've had that relationship to images of men in pop culture that were formative in ways that I look back on and say how incredibly destructive that was so seductive. And I allowed it to be, or not allowed it to be. But it was, for me, it hit me at a moment when it was, shaped my consciousness of something to be that was just utterly unattainable for me.
I mean, but it can be fantastic art that becomes skewed in that way, right? It's not the art's fault that they're in a dearth of other messages. These are the gods that we worship, and therefore the stories that we tell ourselves. So, last question. So 2008, if we're seeing 2008 as this turning point, but the movies that we watched in 2008 are in part interesting because they're the last vestiges of pre-2008. I'm interested in what you think we should pay attention to in the movies that come right after that. I mean, we've talked a little bit about this, right? It's like, then the iPhone is going to come, and then Facebook is going to come, and the MCU is going to come. Just like as we're coming up on 20 years, what do you think the last 20 years has sort of been defined by culturally?
I think it's been defined by either the micro, like the thing that has been so niche marketed that it's just this tiny slice, exploitable slice of an audience that doesn't want to perceive itself as mainstream or mass audience, or the giant inexorable thing that is so mega and so global in a way. Like just the scale of the Taylor Swift Eras tour, it was so overwhelming. The idea that it was like literally geologically seismic, right? That's just crazy. And the extent to which in my lifetime, you couldn't own across media platforms. There was an antitrust prohibition on cross media ownership. So if you owned like movie theaters, you couldn't own movie studios. If you owned movie studios, you couldn't own a radio. If you owned a bunch of radio stations, you couldn't own a TV or whatever. And Reaganism obliterated that. And so we've had 40 to 50 years of just total consolidation. So setting aside how talented or not talented Taylor Swift is, the ability to just synergistically create or work with the inherent popularity of something in order to grow it to some totally unprecedented scope and scale, you're sort of locked between the people exactly like me love this niche
TikTok
economy, right? Exactly, is enhanced by the algorithm, right? The reinforcing powers of the algorithm, or there's a thing that occupies and almost squats on the public or common consciousness, and it's like the only analogy is like the Super Bowl. It's like you might watch, you might not watch, but you're going to be forced to think and talk about it in some sense. And it just feels as though something in between that has kind of fallen away, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah.
What do you have? What do you got?
I mean, nothing in addition to that. I do think that the upside of this small screen, it's me and 1 million people who follow this one person and we get the joke. And then the Taylor Swift, like literally causing an earthquake in Los Angeles. It is exciting that some of the old gatekeepers aren't getting in the way of like more representation, right? I don't think that my kids are going to be negatively impacted by something like Sex and the City anymore. They're going to be negatively impacted by ads that are geared toward them about, lotion regimens, face regimens.
Yeah.
But there isn't going to be this like one culture taught me how to be in the world thing.
I like that.
And that's exciting, even if the algorithm is telling all of them that they need to buy this face wash.
It always comes back to skincare.
The world is ending. Thank you for coming to help us articulate why the world is ending and how we got here.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It was really, really, really fun having this conversation. I enjoyed it a lot.
You've been listening to Hot and Bothered. Please join us over on our Patreon at patreon.com/hotandbotheredrompod. We are a Not Sorry production. I'm the executive producer with our co-executive producer, Ariana Nettleman. This show is edited and produced by Ariana Nettleman, and we are distributed by Acast. Thanks, as always, to our soulmate level patrons, Molly Reilly, who we would chase through an airport to declare our love to, Becky Boo, who we would wait for hours on the top of the Empire State Building for, Elizabeth Schweinsberg, whose heart we would play a game of one-on-one basketball for, Lauren Byer O'Connell, who we would call up on stage to dance with us in front of the whole summer camp, Avi Lichtenstein, who we would make every person in the kingdom try on a shoe for, Kristen Hall, who we would travel through a time portal to spend the 19th century with, Shiri Yadlin, who we would write a sonnet about and read it in front of the whole class, Delia Rose, who we are majorly, totally, but crazy in love with, and Leia Goldberg, who we would carry on our backs as we jump from tree to tree like a little spider monkey. A heartfelt and deep thanks to the amazing Stephen Metcalf for joining us today and letting me just say 2008 go and running with it so brilliantly. And to our team, Julia Argy, Nikki Zoltan, AJ Ramas, Courtney Brown, Anissa Ahmed, Danny Langley, and Stephanie Paulsell.